restoring hope. Open my heart to sing, taking the darkness inside, revealing your light, restoring hope.
And thanks for joining us. I am Tamara Scott. You are listening to Tamara Scott Live as we bring you truth for our time, help when the headlines hit home. We help you live God's Word in today's world. Mac, we want to thank Mac and Webcast One Studios for powering us and allowing us to be on the air, sharing his air with me on American Family Radio. If you're listening on American Family Radio and you want to hear more of the program that we do on Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m. live, Today we're doing it 11 a.m. It's throwing everybody off. We had a studio tour of some new things that are happening here for Webcast One Live, but 10 a.m. Central Time is when we do the show live. You can always join in online, webcastonelive.com. But if you want to go back to the archives and listen to any interview in full or hear more of the interview that you might be missing on American Family Radio, then you can go to Tamara Scott Live on YouTube and you'll hear the show in the entirety. Today joining me is Brad McQueen. Brad has written a book. I'm going to show it for those of you who are watching online. It's just a simple book. Look how thin that is. Very thin. Brad wrote this book, The Cult of Common Core. And what I like about it, Brad is a teacher, and it's not written in the heady academic format that is drawn out and often boring and difficult and just very dry. This is written very conversationally. It's written from, I would say, almost a parent to parent, a neighbor to neighbor type conversational, but boy, the information is really well done. So Brad McQueen, thank you for joining me.
For having me. It's a pleasure to talk to you.
You are very welcome. What prompted you to write this book?
Exactly what you said. When I first was exposed, and we'll go into it later, but when I was first exposed to the true sort of motives, the true end game for Common Core, I started looking around for that book that I could just get a foundation in what Common Core was and if there's any movements against it. And I couldn't find that simple book because every time I read an article that was written against the Common Core, for the Common Core, I just kind of got lost in all the acronyms and the and the verbiage, and I would just stop. And eventually I just had to do all the research. I'm a bit on the lazy side, so I wanted to present it to me, obviously. But eventually I did all the research. I wrote the book that I was looking for to get a basic foundation in Common Core, and so that I could understand the article, so I could have informed conversations, and also it's if I could talk to the parents in my classroom about Common Core, this is the book I would hand to them, or this would be the conversation I'd have if I had a couple hours with them to talk to them. Not using all the verbiage that confused me, and there is some of the acronyms, but it can be quite the rabbit hole going down, following all the different organizations and the weird tentacles and connections, and with all the different organizations comprising what I just call Common Core. You can get lost in the conversation. So the book is in response to that. So I could have everything I learned, I could just have it in one place, and then anyone who wanted to read it could read it.
And so for those of you listening, if you've not heard about Common Core, I would recommend this book. It is an easy read, and as Brad says, he's broken it down for you. There are so many tenets of Common Core. It's hard for me to even discuss it when I go into presentations under 30 minutes, to be honest with you. But it's done about as best possible here, and as Brad said, he breaks down the acronyms. He also breaks down some of the money trails that come in with Bill Gates. Pages 80 to 86 of the book are a list of organizations, groups that have received grants from Bill Gates, who is heavily behind the Common Core, pushing it. And as you say, Brad, because what he sees is a $9 billion, billion with the B, $9 billion market. He wants data so that he can best serve his consumers. He's looking at from a market-driven perspective when we're thinking this is an educational program, and we're thinking how kind of him to be so philanthropic, but this is nothing more than a marketing tool for him. Would you say?
Yeah, and I think it's in that list of grantees from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that I list in the back of my book. That's only 1 year, but it gets all the major players that kept popping up all the time. Because when I did research on Common Core, you kind of see the same names pop up everywhere. And like you said, Bill Gates was everywhere. Anytime anyone needed money for anything related to Common Core, Bill Gates opened up his fanny pack and handed out $1 million bills. And like you said as well, he's very interested in education, or actually in other kids' education. He's very interested in the rest of the country's kids conforming to this Common Core, dumbed-down standards, and everything else for various reasons. But his own kids are in private school safely away from Common Core. There's kind of this mentality with governors as well that, Republican governors and others that are for Common Core, or at least not strongly against it. They have their kids in private school. It's almost like there's this two-tier system of education. There's this one group of elitist progressives that want in both the Republican and Democrat Party and in Bill Gates' party, whatever that is. They're training their kids to hand, they can hand the reins over of being an elitist, being a shepherd. That's the path they're taking, whereas the rest of the kids in the country with this Common Core are being trained to be the sheep. So there's this two-tiered education system going on in our country. And then there is that component of Bill Gates looks at our kids as products. They should be like on an assembly line of computers. They should all have the same program. They should all have the same specifications at the end. They should all be common, so that data can be easily transferred about them, easily, laterally, horizontally, up and down, anywhere. He sees our kids more as products, and he sees that big K through 12 market, not only to sell them educational data and technology, but to cull information, because there's a big data suctioning, NSA-like data suctioning component to Common Core that businesses or private businesses are now being given access to, where they haven't had that access before, where they can do their product development using our kids in the K through 12 system. There's also another component that I hear a lot about, that the chambers of commerces and Bill Gates as well are interested in creating sort of a human resources in our K through 12 system. So our K through 12 system to them is designed to create workers that fit their specifications, not the traditional sense of educating our kids, which says, let's create kids that are grounded in the exceptionalism of our country's history, grounded in classical thought, independence of thought, true critical thinking, so that they can go and take any job. They can have any job. Why tailor them to one job? That I call it why have the chambers of commerce iron lung mentality. With that mentality that the chambers of commerce have during the polio epidemic, they would have been demanding our kids in K through 12 be groomed to be iron lung maintainers and improvers, rather than producing kids that go on to defeat polio with a vaccine. So it's a very complicated, blurred web with any part of Common Core, and Bill Gates is right in the middle of all that.
Absolutely, and I thank you for bringing it out so clearly, succinctly, when you say 20 million to at least 75 different groups to aid in the implementation of Common Core. 9 billion student market he salivates over. In 2013 alone, he directed $20 million to 75 different groups to force Common Core on the rest of us, while his kids find something else. And I think it's in your book that you talk about, and you mentioned it here, his kids are being taught how to make decisions for our kids who are being taught how to be compliant with those decisions. It's very frightening. I want to talk also about the dissenters. Because well, you mentioned, actually, let me go back to the NSA like data suctioning you talked about, because U.S. Senator Ed Markey, Democrat, I think out of Maine, became so alarmed by the reports of the NSA like data suctioning that he began to the U.S. Department of Education. He addressed a letter to the Secretary of Education asking him to explain the rationale of these charges. And you talk about that. The FERPA changes. People think there's a protection for their privacy in the public schools. That is no longer. It has been undone in the execution, in the executive arm of government through regulations and the way they're not enforcing regulations anymore. And so you talk on page 30 about kids being asked to wear beepers that would go off at random times, so they would be prompted to self-report their feelings or record what was causing them to feel frustrated.
Yeah, and that was a study produced with this data gathering in mind. First off, with the FERPA regulations, the specific changes that the education privacy laws, the FERPA laws, weren't changed. President Obama and Arne Duncan changed the regulation. Through executive order, they now don't have to tell parents when their kids' data has been used or accessed. And they also don't have to get their permission, where in the past you had to. In schools, the only people that had access to your kids' data were people who had a need to know status, the direct teacher, and someone who's working close to them. Otherwise, you had to get the parents' permission. You have to get parent permission in most places to put your kids' artwork on their website. But nowadays, after with Common Core and the changes with the data gathering and then the FERPA laws, you don't know when your kids' data is being gathered. And a bunch of field tests were just done with Smarter Balanced Common Core test and the PARC test, where that very thing happened. There were two private companies that went into the schools, and the schools pretended and they acted like they were just part of the testing regimen in our school system, whereas they actually culled a bunch of information from our kids. The kids took these Common Core tests. Now they're taking all that information, and over the summer they were tweaking their tests. The Common Core tests, which they will now sell back because they're private companies, to our states to use as their Common Core tests. Parents weren't asked for their permission for these private companies to come in and do that, and we still don't know what information was gathered from them because they aren't telling us. We don't know where it's kept. But yeah, the FERPA laws have definitely been changed greatly underneath the radar.
And I want to talk too. The questions they're asking, the information they're seeking, is no longer academic only in nature. It is very personal, sensitive information. And the way others have told me on this show, others I've interviewed, it is never expunged from the record. Even in a juvenile detention center, you can have a record expunged, but these will never go off the record. And if you're listening out there, you can just do a search. P20W, the letter P for preschool, 20 for 20 years of tracking, and W for workforce. This is a program designed to track your students in every area of their life, from preschool for 20 years into the workforce. It's quite alarming. And we're going to be talking too. I mean, government is just so intrusive at this point. Many people don't realize what liberties they're losing because they didn't know what liberties that we used to have protected. And so in my hand, if you're watching online, you're seeing a little comic book that was handed or sold to students who attended the the governor's LGBTQ conference here in Iowa last year. And it's called The Mighty Maxie. It's about a young lady. It's about bullying, but we know bullying programs don't work in schools. But it's talking about this journal that these kids fill out, the belief book. It's like a journal. We record our values or something and then turn it in at the end of the year. That's right here on the top of the page. That alone should alarm every parent out there. We turn in our values to the school. The school is now going to have what? They're going to evaluate our values. They're going to tell us what's politically correct, what's not. This is not what schools are supposed to be about, nor should our kids be in any way submissive or are values taught at home submissive to the schools? The schools work for you. Teachers work for you. Brad, you're a teacher. I feel like we've gotten this out of balance, and maybe because you started teaching just in the last 10, 11 years, but aren't the schools supposed to be subject to parents? Are parents not still the authority over their children?
Well, and that's the problem is with Common Core. It's been a slow pull with the progressives in power. That's been their dream, is to pull education into their sphere of influence and to centralize it into Washington, D.C. They'd have more control over it, and they can, like you were saying, they will have control over the content in the classroom. That's the ultimate goal. Common Core has nothing to do with education, just like Obamacare has nothing to do with health care. EPA overreach into states has nothing to do with pollution. It has to do with control. And progressives have been wanting to get control of the education system and therefore control our children's minds for a long time. That's why the second part of my book, the subtitle is Obama's Final Solution for Your Child's Mind and Our Country's Exceptionalism. Because right now, Common Core covers math, reading, writing, the skill areas. But their true goal is to get into, I believe, the social studies, the histories, the sciences, where they can reimagine our country's greatness, our history. So in one generation, they can knock down our country to just an ordinary country, just like any other country in the world. If you have control over a country's history and our kids' vision of what our history and where we come from, you control a lot about our kids. And the parents are being pushed out of the equation. The parents, God gave kids to parents. God didn't give kids to bureaucracies in state capitals or the Department of Education with Arne Duncan and Barack Obama or whoever else the next progressive president becomes. And that's where we've gotten away from that local control. And that's where, you're right, schools are now being seen as this sort of family. The government is also being seen, I think, through progressive interventions in schools as sort of this parent figure as well. With these, a lot of the family structures have been broken down over the years, so that now kids are thirsting for authority figures that they trust. And I think that is part of their agenda, is to start teaching kids morality, to start teaching kids, implanting them the correct, quote unquote, view of the world, the view of family, the view of everything. Like that, the magazine you just quoted, or the comic book you just quoted, it's subtle at first, then it's stronger. Not only does Common Core have the goal of going after the kids, it also it's a data suctioning system from preschool with TS Gold that's out there. It's in Iowa as well. It's in Arizona. It's an assessment system that suctions information from birth to kindergarten. And then Common Core has their tentacles in kindergarten through 12th grade and through career. So they will know not only an incredible amount of information about your kids and grandkids out there, but they'll know a lot about your families, because families and kids talk about their families all the time.
Right.
I know who at my school, I know the Second Amendment families. I know what kind of family structures are at home. Now, with what I'm seeing with TS Gold, which is a preschool Common Core type program, they're actually entering all that information in. Any anecdotal information that they hear, see, any work, any surveys that are going home can be introduced or put into this data suctioning system, and it stays there with your kid from preschool as they go up the ranks. So your kid grows up, and say, for instance, they get through the whole school system and they're still thinking for themselves, they're still believing in American exceptionalism, they want to run for office and take back our country. Well, we have a government that not only has all their health information and psychological evaluations, if they had that done in school, they also have it with Obamacare. You don't think that an administration who finds you a threat isn't going to leak that information to knock you down?
Yeah, not only
IRS scandals and
there you go. Exactly. Not only are they going to leak it, but what will they use to hurt you, to come after you?
Yeah. if they don't take care of you beforehand, if they don't come, you'll be, with these data suctioning systems, the information, all the child's data is attached to the child themselves. There's nothing anonymous. In the past, schools gather data all the time. If they shared it out, higher up, they would usually be aggregate. They would aggregate the data, make it more anonymous. So they might get money from the federal government for special education, some sort of special education program. They would have to report back how many kids were helped by this program. Nowadays, it's the actual kid's name and everything attached to that kid is going to be in their data stream, this longitudinal data stream. It's like a river that runs from your kid all the way up to the Department of Education, and these little streams of data all along the way are being fed into your kid's data stream that fills and fills and fills, and your family information goes in there too. And that data stream can be tapped into any place, and you get the full picture of your kid. Now they've also changed it so that private companies can have access to that data stream. As long as they can show a tangential relationship to the kid's education, they can have research companies come in, technology companies, gaming companies, textbook companies can gather all your kids' information and use it for whatever purposes they are, and they don't have to tell you. They don't have to tell you, and they don't have to get their permission. And so your parents' permission. So I think it's a design with Common Core to separate the kids from their parents, almost like a predator separates. Like in the animal kingdom, a predator might separate the little baby from the herd so they can get it. It's very similar, and I think of Common Core as a child predator. There's no other way to. It's a child predator. So when I hear politicians, especially Republican politicians, who say, "Well, I'm against Common Core, but we still need college and career-ready standards," they basically want to have parts of it in place, not pull out the whole thing. I always want to ask them, well, what part of a child predator would you take off that's running around in your school? Shouldn't you take the whole predator out?
Wow. Brad McQueen is my guest. McQueen is the last name. The Cult of Common Core. You can find him on Facebook, The Cult of Common Core. You can find the book online. It's not expensive to buy, and it's certainly not time-consuming to read and very helpful. We're talking right now about the data sectioning that's happening in our schools right now. And here's part of the problem as well. Teachers are saying, well, this has been going on for a while. Yes, they have been warming up to this. This is true. But once Common Core is set in place, it will be very difficult for schools to move away from it when they lose that local control. And you will lose local control. Local compliance is not local control. When they come in with the Common Core, you will have a set of standards that will demand a specific curriculum. Now, whether you buy it from this company or that colored textbook won't matter. It will be teaching the same information that will apply to those standards or the test curriculum that they're going to ask for. So like Henry Ford said, it doesn't matter what color you want in your Model T as long as it's black. You're not going to have choices anymore. Brad, you mentioned the PS Gold. Is that P as in pre and S as in school, preschool gold?
T like in teaching. It stands for Teaching Strategies Gold.
There you go.
Iowa has it as well.
Teaching Strategies Gold, the word gold. Okay, so we need to learn more about that here in Iowa. And then we also want to talk, you mentioned the testing that went on this past year, and I believe Iowa was part of that. Parents are now opting out their students. You have the ability to opt your students out. Some are using the Hatch Amendment. Some are using forms on various website pages. If you get on Stop Common Core Facebook pages, you'll find them for most any state, and someone can help you with the opt-out there. We have a Facebook page for Iowa, Stop Common Core, but they are for most states. Is that our music? Are we running out of time? We absolutely are. 35:25. We've got to be done by this half hour. Brad is a teacher, and so it's hard to talk with him because he's in the classroom. But Brad, will you come back with us another time and talk more about this?
Definitely.
So much good information in this book. I really encourage you to get a copy of it because You have no idea what's happening in your classroom and the control that's taken place over your children. And I like Brad's analogy about the predatory, separating the child from the herd. Many parents say, I could never homeschool because we wouldn't get along. Trust me, you'd get along so much better if you didn't have that outside influence tearing your baby away from your family. I am Tamara Scott. We've given you great information. I thank Christians for America for helping us make it possible to bring it to you. We'll be back with more. You can find us on Tamara Scott Live on YouTube. Get the archive. Be encouraged. Never be complacent.
Restoring hope. Open my heart to sing, taking the darkness inside, revealing your light, restoring hope.
Good day. Thank you so much for joining us. You caught me texting. I'm texting out messages while I'm coming on air. It is the world we live in, right? We're always multitasking and handling several things at once, which could be why we're losing our liberties, because we're so busy doing other things, we're not paying attention, and there's so much coming at us that we've got to be handling and answering so many different things that we've lost sight of the big things, of the really important things, and that would be our child's education, our family, our liberties, our freedoms. It is under attack. My guest, I am so thankful, joining me for part 2, The Cult of the Common Core. If you're watching online, The Cult of the Common Core, Brad McQueen will be my guest. For those of you who are listening on radio across America, thank you for joining us. Thank you so much for tuning in with us. What we do is trying to give you help when the headlines hit home. We give you truth for our time. And as so many liberties are being attacked and taken, let me just tell you, recently I was traveling on the bus, Family Research Council, the Family Leader, and National Organization of Marriage, touring the Midwest, helping rally voters to understand they're losing liberties. Their votes are so important, and they must vote their values and understand they're losing liberties. While we were on that bus, came the headline that a mayor in Texas, Houston, Texas, had subpoenaed messages from pastors. First off, the separation of church and state you've heard about is not in the Constitution. The only reason they can get by with this is a bill that came out of Texas, ironically, the Senator Johnson, who was annoyed that churches had spoken out against him, tacked something on another bill. It was an amendment, not even a large amendment, and it is what has now become this IRS's arm to unlawfully, unconstitutionally try and hold a limit on pastors and their 501c3s. It is not constitutional. The First Amendment secures their liberties and their freedoms, and that would be what they preach on Sunday as well as what they want to do with on Monday, whether it's talk about a pastor, talk about a vote, talk about an endorsement, or even with their money. But right now we're all playing by those rules. We're obeying those 501c rules of the law of the money and the political stance. But this mayor has overstepped that. She's now asking for a copy of their sermons, the outline. She's asking if they're talking about her. She's asking if they're talking about homosexuality, which she is. And apparently the problem came, according to our guest, Michael Damascus, when she helped usher through some protection for anyone on gender confusion. They could use any restroom they liked. Understand that. As Michael told us, a 40-year-old man, a 50-year-old man could go into a girl's restroom, woman's restroom, and be there for whatever reason, watching young girls where they would be susceptible as a victim. It just doesn't make sense. It goes against our grain. You can see the problems with it if you allow yourself to see past the political correctness of it. You'll see the ineptness of the policy. I want to get back to my guest. Forgive me, Brad Queen, for getting off on that tangent, but losing our liberties is exactly what we're talking about in the cult of the Common Core, because the freedoms of each school district will no longer be. They'll be answering to a federal government, to a mandate out of a centralized location. No longer will they have local control. No longer will they be able to say, we're not going to teach that here. We'd like to teach it in this manner. Brad McQueen was a teacher. He is a teacher for 11 years, and he's been other things besides that, I think is what I was going to say, which I think gives him the ability, the beauty to see the problems with this. Brad McQueen, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
And folks can find you on Facebook, The Cult of the Common Core. They can also find the book online. You and I were talking. Teachers are having a hard time speaking out on this, though they don't like it. Some of the teachers' unions are actually now speaking out on this. But many teachers face repercussions as those who push Common Core work to destroy the dissenters.
Exactly. In the school system, if you want to cheerlead for Common Core, the departments of education will give you the pom-poms to cheerlead for it. In fact, they're using Teachers of the Year to push Common Core. A lot of times when you see teachers on television ads or writing, many times when they're writing op-eds, they'll say Teacher of the Year, Iowa Teacher of the Year, Arizona Teacher of the Year at the bottom, as if it gives them more weight. And each state chooses their own Teacher of the Year. What they never disclose is the entire Teacher of the Year program is run and administered by a Common Core organization called the Council of Chief State School Officers. It holds the copyright to the Common Core standards. So, of course, they're going to choose people that are for the Common Core, and they even brag about how they on the Achieve website, it's another Common Core group, how they use Teachers of the Year to push the Common Core message. So if you're for Common Core, you can say anything you want. Now, to be fair to teachers, many of them are like parents across the country. Many of them are parents across the country. Teachers are. A lot of them don't see the full picture of Common Core. A lot of them still think it's just learning standards that are just being introduced into the schools. But as they have more experience with it, I think they're getting that not only are they learning standards, they're NSA-like data suctioning systems being put in our schools. They're testing, nationalized testing groups being formed. There's also the connection between the kids' data and their testing data. It directly connects to the teacher. And some people might say, well, that's a good idea because we can keep teachers accountable. And that's sort of the cover they use with Common Core, that's what they use it for. And but what that connection between the kids' test results and what they're doing in the class and how they connect to the teacher, that part of Common Core is the compliance method for Common Core. They make sure if a kid sort of doesn't do well on a certain section of the test related to First Amendment rights, for instance, like you were talking about, maybe we should go back. If they don't give the right answers, maybe we need to go back into that kid's data stream and look online at the teacher's lesson plans, which are now all online. Teachers' grades are all online. Teachers' evaluations are all online. Let's go see where that teacher, what they were teaching and when they taught it. So it's a compliance method. And also the kids' information and testing results are directly tied to teacher pay and teacher evaluations now. That's why you're hearing the teachers' unions coming out against it in some areas, because you go after teachers' pay, you go after the union dues. The teachers' unions, the NEAs and the AFTs of the world, they were strongly for Common Core back in 2010 when it was implemented, and they were okay having our kids be the victim of Common Core, these Common Core predators. But when it started hurting their bottom line, now they're against it. I mean, I'm grateful that they're joining the chorus and shouting to get rid of this Common Core thing. But you've got to be clear that that's the component they're really after.
And now they see it coming after their liberty as well, and how they teach, how they'll be able to implement a lesson. It's exactly what we're talking about with those pastors. Don't just think the government, the mayor will come after those folks. They'll be after you next if they're not stopped for this intrusion.
And the thing is, they usually go after people of faith first. A lot of times they're trying to pull in the faith-based schools now with Common Core, kind of like they did with the Catholic bishops with Obamacare. They got their support, and then they nailed them when they didn't want to hand out birth control. It's the same thing. They're trying to court the faith-based crowds to get them on board. If you go, because they're an existential threat to Common Core. They're teaching sort of principles and values that are grounded in something else other than conformity and control being given over to a earthly power, so to speak. So they're courting the faith-based, the Catholic schools, and a lot of Catholic schools are aligning up with the Common Core curriculum. I don't know about the databases yet, but Common Core, it affects public schools, charter schools, religious schools, and homeschoolers. It's going to definitely affect as
Absolutely.
well. And homeschoolers are definitely the biggest threat to Common Core and progressives in general, because parents are taking control and they're exercising their right as parents and controlling their kids' education and imparting their values. That's a definite threat to progressives in Washington, D.C., in both the Republican and Democrat Party.
Absolutely. And you mentioned progressives, and let me just say it again. If you hear someone talk about being a progressive and they're running for office, understand progressive means it will be oppressive. Their views will oppress you because they're going to implement large governmental policies, and that will limit your individual liberties. When you hear someone talk about being a liberal, in most instances, that means your liberties will be attacked. We saw that in Iowa. When the liberals were elected, they took out smoking, made it illegal in public buildings and private businesses. Like it or not, market should determine that. The public should determine that, not your government.
With the progressives as well, it's in their name, they progressively are doing these things. They have an end game in mind, and they progressively, like the mayor in Houston, that happens. Then another thing happens across the country, then another thing, till it becomes the norm, and then they reach a little further. Then they reach a little further. Education was more locally controlled in the past, and slowly but surely, progressively, it has been centralized into Washington, D.C., with No Child Left Behind, was part of it under George Bush. And then Obama's administration with Common Core is just the final solution for our children's minds and their education in our country's exceptionalism.
And I want to talk about a couple things. You're right. Education used to be more local when we had, higher scores is what they used to tell us. And I would say we put people on the moon using flashcards and one-room schoolhouses. That local control creates competition. At the same time, I think you talk in your book, we hear so much about us failing compared to other countries. I think you mention the things that we're strong in. Let's see those other countries when they develop a Google, an internet, the creations, the innovations that still come out of America.
Exactly, and that's the thing that progressives don't need to. They aren't based in reason. They'll just keep saying the same thing over and over, even though it doesn't make sense, till you think you're crazy for applying reason to this. They always cite our kids as being less than other countries' kids, and they cite this PISA test, this PISA test. It's an acronym test. It's a Eurocentric test that is given every couple of years, and our kids aren't the top kids. Usually it's Finland and Singapore and Shanghai or something. And they always cite that as, well, our kids must be failing because these other kids are doing so well on these tests. Well, I always say, great, let them be the championship test takers in the world. Look at what our kids grow up to do. Our kids grow up to put a man on the moon. Our kids grow up to create a military that is the most advanced, technologically advanced military in the world, that protects the world from tyrants time and time again, and tyranny that has its roots in those very same one-size-fits-all centrally controlled countries that are topping our kids on some little test.
And I had a CIA agent tell me one time, at least I'm told he was a CIA agent, that America is the one who creates. Other countries may conform or make the assembly line, make it better, cheaper, put it out in mass quantities better than we do. But America is the creation, the innovation, the good ideas. We've seen that. I also want to touch on, you mentioned in our part one, and for those of you who want to find the show in its entirety, we're so thankful for our American Family Radio listeners across the nation. But for those who want to find the archives of the show, Tamara Scott Live, you can go to Tamara Scott Live on YouTube, and you'll find the Brad McQueen shows. You can find them part one and part two. You talked about them changing history and that this will affect homeschoolers, private schoolers, Christian schoolers in time, and we already see that. David Coleman, the architect behind the Common Core, has gone to the College Board. And on this show, you can also find that archive with Larry Krieger and Jane Robbins from American Principles Project. We exposed the fact that the Advanced Placement U.S. History exam has been changed. The transparency has been diminished, and what they've done, what used to be a 5-page outline to the AP programs, the schools participating, is now well over 100-page document on what you must teach, and that you need know nothing else besides what's in this document. And it's not so transparent anymore. America's triumphs are diminished. Our military triumphs are not touted. Any errors we've had, any issues we've overcome, slavery or anything else has been really overblown and overemphasized. We are no longer an exceptional nation into this teaching. And that is the Advanced Placement U.S. History exam. The Republican National Committee, I know, passed a resolution because I was able to draft it with the help of Jane Robbins. It passed unanimously at their Chicago meeting that we would ask legislators, congressional members, not to fund the College Board, until we get transparency back in this testing and accuracy back in the content being tested. So, Brad, you're absolutely right in what you're talking about. Coming forward, this will affect and impact homeschoolers, private schoolers, Christian schoolers, but they are working to change the history, the heritage, the legacy, the lineage we have in America.
Yeah, because if you can change that in one generation, you can change America. If you take out the exceptionalism, like in the AP guidelines, AP American History guidelines, you take out our American exceptionalism, what's left in those guidelines for what should be taught to basically some of our brightest kids take advanced placement classes so they can get college credit in high school for history. So what remains to be taught and what they're teaching is American oppressionism, victimization, social injustice, imperialism. It's quite disgusting, and they talk very little, if at all, about our great founding fathers and our great military leaders, or our military in general doesn't get much of a mention unless it's in a negative light. And so the homeschoolers and people that go to religious schools, if you want to get AP credit, you're going to have to pass that test that is based on that set of criteria.
Right.
And with David Cohen being head of the College Board, they've changed the SAT college entrance exam, which affects college entrance admissions as well. They've dumbed it down. They've aligned it with Common Core, so homeschoolers and others will be at a disadvantage if they don't align their instruction to the Common Core. And there's also another line of thought, and I wouldn't put it past these people, that with the chambers of commerce, they like to see our K through 12 educational system be used as a human resource development, so that they can sort of ask our school systems to create the type of workers they want. I could see a situation where you go to a job interview and it's mandatory that you have attended a college and career ready program. That's code for Common Core. And if you're a homeschooler, you don't have that.
And we know that those programs don't work. The college and career doesn't necessarily work. James Milgram, who was on the committee with the Common Core, the only mathematician on the committee, Professor Emeritus from Stanford, I believe, refused to sign off on it when he saw how poor the math standards were, how lacking it would be. They would not be STEM ready. So though your governors and your promotional educational Department of Education materials may promote STEM or college career and ready, because they say it in no way indicates that they will actually do it.
No. And it doesn't prepare them for college or career. And even Jason Zimba, one of the other architects of Common Core, specifically says that if you want to go on to a more advanced engineering, math, technology sort of career, Common Core is not going to prepare you for that. You need to do more than is prescribed. So it's a dumbed down version where everyone gets a trophy, rather than lifting up our system to meet to raise kids' expectations for their academic achievement. We've dumbed it down and lowered the bar so that everyone can jump over it.
And I want to touch on one more thing. I looked it up while we were talking. Carolyn McClarty, the National Committee woman out of Oklahoma, another wonderful asset to the Republican National Committee. She chairs the resolution committee. Put this out yesterday, $800 million annual budget. $800 million annual budget. $1 million of that goes towards lobbying. This is your college board, by the way. And they receive $79 million in direct funding from the federal government. So that's your tax dollars working against you, working against the history that so many of our ancestors have secured through their blood, sweat, and tears as veterans. And we just can't let their sacrifice go down in vain because someone wants to rewrite who we are and what we are in this country. I'm talking with Brad McQueen. I'm holding up the book for those of you who are watching live online. We do this show on Wednesdays, 10 a.m. Central, on Webcast One Live. Webcast One Live, if you want to join us any week, we invite you to do so. You can find the archives on Tamara Scott Live. And you can also get a hold of us, Tamara Scott, Truth for Our Time Facebook, Truth for Our Time Facebook. But you can get a hold of Brad McQueen on the Cult of Common Core on Facebook. The Cult of Common Core on Facebook. Brad, we're talking about the Common Core, and I need to thank as well Christians for America, Crave, Christians for America. We thank them for their sponsorship and making it possible for us to get this information to you so that you can make a difference and you can have control in your livelihood and your family. Brad, you in this book, The Cult of Common Core, again, thank you for making it so easily readable. You talk about what the cult saith, and then you give us deprogrammed rebuttal. Thank you so much for allowing us and giving us some ideas on how to handle and come back at some of these statements. I guess I want to come back to the teachers thing as well. In Iowa, we had a very expensive education bill go through a year or so ago, and it had mentoring teachers in it. The mentoring teacher program. And again, that comes back to the compliance. If teachers are not teaching to the Common Core, that mentoring teacher program, or as I think it was referred to in other countries in history, in America near World War II, master teachers, it is a compliance mechanism. We're losing the ability, we're losing the freedom, the local control in our own districts. Have you heard much about opting out of the testing?
I've heard some of it. I know Janet Wilson has done a lot with the National Opt-Out campaign, informing people about how to opt out. I think the thing is, and that's growing. But the thing is, if you don't know what's happening in your school, then you can't opt out. Or if you don't know you have the right to opt out, then you can't opt out. So we still need to get that information out about what's going on in the schools as far as the Common Core, definitely. Because their goal is to, a lot of teachers are leaving the profession. Veteran teachers are leaving. They're realizing this is the final program. This isn't this isn't just another program coming along. This is the one that's sticking. And a lot of veteran teachers are leaving. A lot of teachers that have been in the profession just for several years are looking for a way out. This isn't what they signed up for. They signed up to influence lives and communicate their passion for education and knowledge, whereas Common Core sees that as a threat. They want education implementers. You implement what is being given to you. And we haven't touched on this, but I've done a lot of research and I've written the book, but I also worked on the Common Core test.
That's right. And I did want to bring that out. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, I worked on the Common Core test. Arizona was in the PARC test. There's Smarter Balance, which I was part of, and PARC, it's an acronym, which Arizona is a part of. And I've worked on our state test, our statewide assessment for the past 5 years, so I know something about standards and creating tests. So they asked me to be one of 5 people from Arizona to go work on the PARC test. I worked on writing rubrics. I also worked on the reading and writing for 5th grade, looking at the test items. And I'm using work in quotes lightly. We were asked for input, but our input, we were more window dressing for this process, just like Dr. Milgram was used as window dressing, just like Dr. Sandra Stotsky was used as window dressing when they were developing the standards. They want to check the box that teachers and experts were we're involved in the test creation process and the standard creation process when we're not. In fact, when I went for the first time to go work on these standards, I had no opinion about Common Core either way. I just knew it was coming. I just figured it was a new set of standards, and I just wanted to see what it was going to look like on a test. Maybe I might have to adjust my teaching. I was more curious, and a lot of teachers out there are waiting for the test to come out to see how it impacts them in the classroom.
Brad, thank you so much for joining us today. We are already out of time once again, but you can find us on the Tamara Scott Live YouTube. Brad McQueen, The Cult of Common Core. Please check it out online. Be encouraged. Never be complacent.